Welcome to a workshop offered by the University of Kentucky in the Office of Work, Life, and Benefits. This is one of the workshops that we offer for our UK working parents. And a parenting role could be a guardian or biological parent, foster parent, kinship, grandparent, anyone in a parenting role. So today we're going to be talking about navigating the empty nest and changes in parenting roles. And so for parents that have older children, this may really resonate with you as you start to think about those transitions. And so we have with us Dr. Monica Mundy. She is a professor here at the University of Kentucky and also works in the Cooperative Extension Service. And so we are happy to have her with us today to walk us through this topic. Thank you so much, Dr. Mundy, for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me and for taking a few moments to talk about this topic. It's one that I'm approaching and getting to myself as the mother of a teenager, and it's one that I experienced with my own family as well. And so, hmm, First, I just want to reflect on that moment that many parents experience. We've seen it in like movies and things, and you've probably experienced yourself or had friends that have experienced it as well. And it really is that moment where, it's you're dropping your kiddo off, say, at college or moving them into their first apartment. And you really think about that moment, everything gearing up to it. Like, the transition is coming. You kind of get there and you gotta say goodbye or see you soon. Or, in the case with me and my mom, it was talk to you tomorrow. She called me on her way as she was driving off. But it's a moment that it's really hard to prepare for. And it's one of those things where the transition is coming, that it's going to be different. Um, but until you experience it, um, it hits a little different if that makes sense. And so I've had my friends explain this moment to me that they felt as well. And how do you navigate that? So once that moment comes, where do we go from there? So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so I put together three basic kind of steps that happen during this transition time for us to kind of think about as individuals that have experienced or will be experiencing this fairly soon. And it truly is a time of growth, and we have to think first about acknowledging what's happening, right? And then thinking about what do we do once we've acknowledged that and we begin to kind of move forward, and then truly reinvesting in ourselves and in our families as a whole to kind of get through that transition period. And all of this is not linear. It may be something that you may move in between the stages. You may acknowledge it and start to rebuild, but then, maybe the kiddos come back and they come home, and then you have to like kind of go through the process again and reimagine and acknowledge it again. And so nothing's linear, it's always going to be moving. But hopefully these steps kind of help with the process as you move forward. So the very first step is really just acknowledging that the change is happening, right? And this can include realizing that there's going to be some losses, things that will be different, but there are some things that you may gain in the process as well. So it could be a bit more freedom, but you are losing that sense of routine and identity. And so we'll talk about what it may look like as those roles change. But, you know, if we skip this step, right, if we move past this step without really thinking about it, the emotions that we feel when we start to acknowledge that this change is happening come up later in other ways. And so kind of taking the time to understand that it's happening and thinking about what that looks like and how we move forward is important. So thinking about like what are we really losing? Um, well, it's just not losing time um, with your kiddo, right? You're losing and sometimes entire communities, right? And our daily structures, things that we do can be centered around our kiddos. I know I joke all the time, and sometimes when I'm doing evening presentations, I have to remember to take off my evening alarm. So I have an alarm that goes out off at 3:30 every day, that reminds me to make sure that my kiddo gets picked up from school. And I like to joke and say it's my equivalent of the when we were younger, the "Do you know where your children are" commercial. And so that's just a part of my daily routine and my structure. It's at 3:30, like that's my reminder to make sure that if I'm not picking up my kiddo, I've got everything lined up and we're ready to go. So thinking about, the loss of those daily routines that we have, we also build social circles around our kids as well. It could be that you're a member of PTA, the Parent Teacher Association. So you're really involved in that local school, your kiddo's school and what's going on, sports teams, activities. Like my daughter's a competitive dancer, and so much of what we do revolves around practice at the studio, getting costumes together, going to competitions. And so that it really is like a built-in social circle that we have as well. And then that just general sense of purpose that we have, right? It's to serve in that caregiver role. And so as things change and we start to not be relied upon in the traditional sense of, being a caregiver for our kiddos, um, that can be a loss that we feel. And so one of the pieces of this is giving yourself permission, right? Permission to have these feelings, permission to experience and think about what's happening, in knowing, first of all, there's no right way to feel, right? Sometimes, you may feel a sense of pride, that you've um, got this individual that's ready to chart their way independently in life, but also there can be that sadness at the same time. And both of those emotions are okay and everything in between, right? Having those emotions isn't a weakness. But acknowledging and having those emotions really help us move forward. It's just a healthy part of the adjustment period that we have. And so part of that acknowledgement is realizing that there is a fundamental just shift in that parenting role. Um, Never does parenting just end, right? Our kiddos are our kiddos for life. But it does change shape a little bit. And so instead of managing daily life, it becomes and morphs into this more supporting of that independence, right? Finding that independence, seeing what that means. And so the connection is still there, but the control that we have as parents begins to decrease a bit. And so, where that managing daily life role, as far as schedules, decisions, thinking about what happens day to day, we start to have a fundamental shift where that role becomes more of one that is supportive, one that's listening, um, forming and having to have a bit more trust in what they do each day. So the key there, as I mentioned before, is that that influence that you have as a parent doesn't go away. It just looks a little different, more guiding, going from stepping in, to stepping along, walking along with each other. And for many parents, this is where that growth happens for their kiddos. Um, and this is where that growth happens for the parent as well. And so I love this image because it kind of shows how we go from being more of a manager where we're setting that direction for our kiddos, making the decisions, solving the problems for them, to where we're listening, we're engaging, celebrating their growth, right? Helping them figure out how to solve the problems, and cheering them on as they're hitting this new stage in life. And so there are some practical ways to think about moving from a manager to a consultant. Is kind of a fun way of putting it. That you're still involved, but you're not running the show. So one of the simplest tools that you can do in thinking about that reframing of talking and supporting is just asking how you can help, right? Asking if they just need someone to listen, right? That question alone kind of starts to show the shift in the dynamic, and shows that respect and allowing you to move into a more adult relationship and strengthening that adult relationship and showing that respect that, I want to be here to support you and seeing how best it is to do that. And so you don't lose your role as a parent. That never goes away. But you just begin to rewrite what it looks like as well. So we have the first step where we're acknowledging that this change is happening. Now we have the second step where we start to focus less on our kiddos and more on ourselves. And the first step to that is kind of rebuilding your circles and routines. Um, And so, whereas before, those routines and connections were built in and sometimes revolves around um, your kiddo, now you can make those connections be a bit more intentional. And at first, it can feel a little uncomfortable to start to focus on yourself and really create that structure that once existed and revolved around your kiddo, but now it's revolving around you. And eventually it won't feel as uncomfortable, and hopefully it starts to feel a bit more empowering, where you have the opportunity to focus on yourself. And so you get to start switching from those automatic routines, is kind of how I describe it. So just like my alarm that goes off every day, that's something automatic, right? We get up. We make sure the kids get to, school. We get them, pick them up. We take them to their events. All those things that we just do. Then we get to begin to make these more intentional choices and thinking about what we want to do throughout the day. And so the first piece is rebuilding those circles. Um, Sometimes it may be that you're replacing circles that you had with new ones, or it could be that you're reconnecting with maybe old friends or old communities as well. And so it's not necessarily meant to replace what's happening, it's meant to be a bit of a renewal. And so there may be some spaces where you say, I'm not going to give up this space, but my role may look a little different. And so one good example is PTAs oftentimes have community memberships and they welcome community support. So even if you don't have a kiddo that attends that school, if you still want to be there, you still want to help, you still want to participate, I promise no one is going to turn that help away. So sometimes it's thinking about the role in your existing connections and what that looks like, or beginning to build new communities and looking at other shared experiences and interests and finding those opportunities that provide that belonging and connection to fill with new time that you have. Also, rebuilding your time, thinking about creating new daily and weekly routines. And you get to begin to think about what's meaningful, not just kind of what's keeping you busy. And this could look different depending on what stage you're in. And the ultimate goal isn't to just fill every minute with something to do, right? But it's to build that routine that feels meaningful, that's grounded in your interests, and that also starts small, but helps to build that consistency and momentum. And so it could be that perhaps you enjoy doing something like painting or running or reading, and you join a book club or you join a local running club, and things of that nature. So it doesn't have to be, filling every minute of every day, but just finding small things throughout that time that brings you just a little bit of joy. And so the third step is reinvesting in purpose and identity, right? This ideal of reinvesting is really where I think that transformation happens. And that's really where you get to step back and say, what matters to me now? And think about what you want to build moving forward. And you really start to shift that focus from caregiving to personal growth and really redefining exactly what it is that you would like to do in this stage as well. And so this is where um, people begin to think about what are some of the things I was interested in prior to my parenting years, and might begin to revisit those roles again, or potentially expanding what those roles used to be, or trying new activities. And this could be where you expand from, maybe having that reading club to maybe you're volunteering and leading one in your community. So it could be engaging in mentoring, volunteering, community work, what that looks like for you. Can be a little different than what it may look like for someone else. And then really expanding on your identity, right? You're just not a parent. And sometimes that can be what we think about quite often as this change is happening. It's like, well, that role is changing. How can we um, expand upon that? But once again, like I said before, being a parent doesn't go away. But this stage really gives you this space to look at other things that you may want to be involved in as well. This is really where the growth takes place. I think this is the stage that we live the most in. And also our identity just kind of evolves as time goes on as well. And so, kind of bringing the three pieces all together, we want to acknowledge that the change is happening and that things will be a little different. We want to rebuild those circles and routines, because those really are the things that we lose, or don't have those same routines in the very beginning. So thinking about things we can do to um, begin to build something into that time. And then thinking more broad and long term of reinvesting in that purpose and identity of who we are as individuals, who we are as families, if you have a spouse or other kiddos and siblings as well. And just knowing that as time goes on, as everything changes, that um, whatever that quote unquote emptiness looks like is okay, right? And that we can take the time to make it what we would like to make it, and that taking that time is okay. Yeah. Right. And um, thank you guys for having me. I will take any questions that you may have as well. And really quickly, I'll show my very last slide with references too.